Hi everyone. Today I am speaking to Stephan Burow, VP Finance of Gousto, a company that delivers ingredients and recipes across the UK to customers' homes, and one that I personally massively benefited from. I think it was a saviour of during my pregnancy and very brief maternity as well, because it just meant that there was a very easy selection of things to do, and I could quickly do it on my app and it was all done. And my husband was forever grateful because he wasn't being told off by using the wrong ingredients and knew exactly what he was meant to cook that evening, which is it's a great subscription model. It's a great business, and you've been experiencing some high growth as well over the since you've started. You've gone this year. Gousto was valued, so we're talking Q1 valuation of near 2 billion, and also recently closed its latest funding round. So there's this huge momentum, and been through, of course, an incredible 2 years along with everyone else, but even more so when you're in a fast-paced tech business. So Stephan, what would you say what's gotten you through the last couple of years, and what's been your biggest lesson as a leader?
Yeah, great. Great to be here, Alexandra, and thanks for the question. I think what has gotten me and the team through the last 2 years is probably, I'd probably say there's two things to it. Firstly, people like to talk about purpose and understanding of purpose, but in my mind, purpose really means understanding what are your personal values and thinking about how your personal values align with the work that you do. And for me, those personal values, there's probably 5 that I'd call out. It's about integrity, being a finance leader, that's key. It's about curiosity. So particularly in Gousto, where we have huge ambition, where we have to solve sometimes difficult problems, you want to be curious so that you can find novel ways to solve whatever comes your way. It's openness, drive, and empathy. So those, I think, are my 5 key values. And so when I am faced with a forever changing world and a business with huge ambition, it's about how do I live my everyday in a way that the work I get involved in is closely aligned to what my values are. And I think thinking about purpose in that way, turns that purpose into something you can really action on and work with. I think it also helps to tackle that, there are some bits of my job that I really love, and there are some bits of my job that on the face of it might be a little bit less exciting, but it's about how do you look at those things in a way that you still find the link to your values, and then it almost becomes easier. And when I think about my team, who just for context in the organization, I think the finance team has some of the highest engagement and the company-wide the lowest attrition. When I think about my team, a lot of the conversations are around long-term development plans and very much understanding, well, what is it that, what are your core values? What are the things that you value in life, and how do you translate that into work? And then how do we structure what you want to get out of the next 2 years in a way that it develops yourself, it solves problems for the business, and so that when the going gets tough because workload is high or the problems are difficult to solve, you can see that what you're doing is for a greater purpose rather than just getting the task done. So that's I guess how we've managed the last 2 years, and what I see as sort of some of the leadership learnings or lessons that I reflect on. That's certainly one.
That's a huge, values. What can you actually do? How do you consistently bring values to the work that you do?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's 2 elements to that. I think one is like a corporate point, and one is a personal point. I think from a corporate point, we are somewhat, I would have said lucky, but we've been quite intentional about articulating what are the sort of ownership principles or the cultural norms that we aspire to behave to here at Gousto. And so it's relatively straightforward to jot down what your personal values are and find a home of those in our ownership principles or in our cultural norms. And so then when you think about, okay, this is the work I now need to do, and you think how you might solve it, we have almost a manual of, well, these are some of the behaviors we'd expect you to exhibit, and hopefully there is some parallel with what you value and what we value as an organization. And I think personally, on a personal level, I mean, I've been lucky enough that the team, when I joined, we were 6 people. By now I have 50 in my team. I obviously have probably a certain bias towards hiring people that share some of my value sets. And so as a leader, although I have to wear many different hats, it is ultimately about still being true to your values. And so when you're in a room with the team and we're talking about something that isn't a particularly exciting topic, we're true to our values. We call it out, we acknowledge it, but we then lean into a positive association, whether it's, hey, let's be curious about how can we solve it in a better way? Or, hey, how can we, talking about drive, how can we get this done as quickly as possible so that we get quicker to those things that give us joy and excitement. So I think there's these 2 angles to translating what is a list of values into how you practically influence the team and yourself in using them in a business environment, so to speak.
And are there anything, because we can go back to like, okay, how is this, how are we leading with like integrity? How are we doing that as we're talking about this boring topic or going across the day-to-day elements? But in your opinion, what is it that stops you as a leader or anyone from what detaches you from the values? What can get in the way?
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, I think I think it requires being intentional about putting your values at the forefront of your decision making almost. And obviously that doesn't mean that every single, when I sign up expenses for one of my team, I'm not reflecting on whether this decision is aligned with my personal values or not. Obviously that's not it. But I do think that there is almost, a muscle that you have to train, which at the beginning requires, okay, let me really think about how do I, what are the things that are most important in my world in terms of decision making, commercial decisions or whatever they might be, team decisions. What's the range of decisions I could take here, and how do those marry up to the values I have? I think the first time you do that, it almost feels unnatural. It's quite a novel way of thinking about that. I think the more you do it, though, the more you practice that muscle of looking at your decision making, the way you communicate, the mode of communication, the way you engage through the lens of your values, so that you can also get to a point where you can stand behind your decisions. And sometimes those decisions might be 100% aligned with, your line manager or the rest of the organization, but equally there might be some decisions which are a little bit less aligned, but why you're taking that decision, because ultimately it is the one that you stand behind because of your alignment to your values. Sorry, just to close the loop and answer your question, I think what gets in the way is that people aren't used to even considering it. I think workload is high in many organizations. That also doesn't help. And so the first thing that goes are the things that, are harder to think about because they haven't done it before. And I think that's often the case for many of these things.
So it sounds like you've almost had to, something made you think about the way you were thinking, if that makes sense. So was there a point where you went, I've really got to look at the way I'm making decisions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I've probably benefited from the fact that, my career started at Unilever on the graduate scheme, and I think I was very lucky that that organization, placed a great emphasis on learning and development, long-term career thinking, values, the behaviors, not just the what you achieve, but how you achieve it. And so I think, by now, having, been in the professional world for quite some time, I've probably benefited from having had that seed planted a long time ago and always having it in the back of my mind and thinking about it a bit more. I think that's the first one. I think secondly, I'm a great believer in sustainable performance. And I think sustainable performance is understanding what motivates and engages people over the long term. I can certainly squeeze more like output from my team in the short term, you just turn into a little bit of a, taskmaster and dictator. And my team might say I still am a little bit of that, but I think there's only so far that you can turn that dial before people vote with their feet and engagement drops and you're not achieving sustainable performance. And so I think certainly as I've, had the privilege of managing bigger teams, that notion, I've always thought about that as to how do I drive sustainable long-term performance, and that together with this awareness of long-term career planning and PDPs led me to think about, okay, it's about alignment of values, understanding what motivates an individual, where do they really want to be at the age of 45, what's their work-life balance look like, etc., so that you can craft a plan with that individual that, as I said, when the going gets tough, they understand why you're here and they have that alignment. So yeah, I think it's been where I am today is very much a product of an ever increasing intentional thought process over many years in the nicest sense.
It sounds like you had this huge, like, as you say, that planted the seed right at the beginning going through the graduate program, and so you had that with you, growing with you throughout your career. And now you're so focused on, you said that your team has grown, so there must be a lot of energy for you to spend to have these PDPs with all your team, which of course, is good because they've got this progression, they've got this eye on where they're headed. You're focusing on them as an individual as well and their individual needs rather than the collective. That's a lot as well with the roles that you yourself need to manage and keeping your eyes on the ball. So what do you do for you to keep yourself at that sustainable performance level?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that there are, I think there's probably two aspects to that. I think the first one, what helps tremendously is that I think I said empathy was one of my values, but I generally enjoy sharing my knowledge, giving back, leading a team and investing the time into it. And that's good for me. Other people don't enjoy that. And they're almost being forced to, lead a team and then they don't enjoy it and it doesn't work that well. But for me, the fact that I do enjoy it and it is a value of mine, obviously then helps me to, it's not a headwind to invest the time into it. I think that said, with I think 6 direct reports and 50 people in the team, it does take up a significant amount of time. And then obviously I have my own specific piece of work I need to get to. I think then it feeds into balancing what you want to put into work with what you want to get out of work with regards to the rest of your life in the nicest sense. And I think commitment to a job is not the same as working 150 hours. It's about being highly intentional where you invest your energy and your time, understanding what is the thing that only you can do. To quote Timo, our founder, he uses that phrase a lot, and I think it's very powerful. What are the things that only I can do where I add the most value? And so to close the loop on it, although there are things that, are very much for me to solve and for me to influence the board or the leadership team on or whatever, but actually one of the things that only I can do in my role is do a lot of this development team with my staff, because the multiplied impact of 6 direct reports and then everyone else growing and learning is far greater than anything I could do individually. Yeah, and I think it's about the usual stuff, having balance in life, understanding exercise regime, a good diet, good night's sleep. Those are really key to just personal well-being and mental resilience.
But that's hard, isn't it? Because we can say a lot of these and we can do things like, yes, eat well, sleep well. How as a leader, especially in your position, how do you actually prioritize that and your, as you say, the work-life balance? Although someone said to me this week, the work-life harmony rather than balance.
Yeah, great question. And I think, I'm going to go on a tangent. I think life, to be content in life, a lot of it is about relationships and expectation management. And I think that's both work and, personal life. And so what I say to my team a lot, and what I would also say to, Timo and the senior leadership team here is, we can do anything you ask of us, but we can't do it at the same time. And so it is about building and establishing strong relationships with those that are your key stakeholders, and thereby having an avenue for dialogue that is, enables high trust, and that that enables a conversation that says, what are the most important or urgent things that we want to, and I think the keyword is want rather than need, but that we want to get on with, and then setting the example of, well, if we get through those things and it's, I don't know, 7 o'clock on a Friday, then that's the end of the day, and we accept that there'll be things that we will pick up the next week, because it is not about working 100 hours every week. That is not how we drive sustainable performance. And I would like to think that to some extent I lead by example, in the sense of there are many things I say yes to, because again, I'm driven and I'm excitable and I enjoy being here, but there are also many things that I either say no to or I do not look at, because against my value set and against what I think is important, they just do not feature in the top 3. And so it's going to be left.
Are there things you struggle with, like in terms of keeping your, like saying no to, or keeping your sustainable? Is there personal things that you struggle with? Are there things that you personally struggle with in terms of like being able to say no, that you've had to overcome?
Yeah, I think if you find yourself in an environment, whether that's a for-profit organization or a charity or whatever it might be, if you find yourself in an environment where you feel a close connection and your values are aligned, then inevitably I think you will end up feeling very driven and excited, and naturally you want to contribute as much as you can. And so there is certainly an element of discomfort around saying no and realizing that you're saying no to maintain well-being and whatever else. But in some cases, I certainly can't help the niggle that in an ideal world, I also just want to get this over the line, because either it'll help you tomorrow, or my own standard is such that I just ideally would want to get it done, but I can't. But I think again, it's a bit like what we talked about with using the lens of values to interrogate decision making. It's a muscle you train, and the more you train the muscle of, okay, I'm okay with saying no, the more comfortable you get with it, and you also see the value of saying no, and you realize why you are saying no, because you want to turn up on Monday still feeling energized rather than burnt out, so to speak.
I think there's, especially the view is that someone will go through their career and they have these leadership lessons, and then that stays with them. But sometimes it's a case of, especially on your way into senior leadership, that actually you get bogged down and you forget the initial lessons you learned, and it's hard to keep them at the very front of what you do. So saying no actually can be, especially when someone wants to please, wants to be seen as having integrity, of being a really hard worker, of being really diligent and caring. And it can be hard to prioritize that no. And really hard to prioritize, like make that key decision as the night is going on a Friday night, to go, life will be better for me on Monday if I did finish this, but also I can feel that I'm really having to push this, and I can feel that I'm potentially being slower than I would usually be, and I'm not being as productive, and it might not create harmony at home if I stay any later, and all of these questions. So what would you advise someone on how to prioritize that no?
Yeah, it's a great conversation, and luckily by now, when I think about my direct reports, I have a pretty open relationship with them, and we quite openly talk about the fact that ultimately, whether I think they're doing a great job or not, actually does not matter. What matters is whether they feel they're doing a great job or not. And I think that in this situation of, are you feeling empowered to say no? It ultimately comes down to, if I'm sitting there Friday, 7 o'clock, I should feel, if I want to do the work, it should be because I genuinely want to do it, rather than because there's external, a desire to please the boss or a desire to impress person X or something else. It's either based on my value set and what I care for, I want to do it, in which case I can stand behind the decision and I can tell the family why I stayed a bit longer, and hopefully they'll, recognize that. Or, it is just simply not what I want to do. It is not aligned with what I care for, and I don't do it. And I'm happy to accept the consequence, but again, you can stand behind the decision. And I think that, and obviously it's easier said than done. It's very easy for me, at the relative top of the organization to say that. I'm sure someone more junior might be like, well, that report needs to get finished. So, it's all fair well. But I think, a greater appreciation to care less about what others think and act more in alignment with what matters to you. And then also what's your longer term career plan. And again, what are your values and what do you care for is part of the unlock of feeling comfortable behind saying no. And as we already spoke, it's a muscle you need to train. It'll feel very odd the first time round.
And how did you know to do that? How did you know that it was a muscle that you needed to train? Was that something you learnt from other leaders you had, or was it from your graduate program? Where did that come from?
Yeah, I think I was very lucky to benefit from some great managers, line managers, senior leaders in organizations that I witnessed, and how they spoke, how they conducted themselves, what they did, and a lot of what I said just now isn't my genius thinking. It's regurgitating what I would have heard in different guises with my slant and perspective on it. So I think I benefited from that, and I would hope that as my team works with me, there's some things that as they go through their career, they're able to take into the roles they do either here or elsewhere.
Well, however, I will counter you, because you said it wasn't your genius thinking, but in a sense, it was, because you're the one that put it all together. And you had this, I suppose, buffet of when we all do, every one of us will have a selection of experiences. And one thing from having these conversations is that there is always the leader that influenced you and that gave you that really great idea of what to do and what you want, and like, oh, that was, wow, that really impacted me. And I'm going to do that as a leader. I'm going to choose to do that. And I think that's a great thing to do. And everyone always says there's like 2 or 3 people that go, oh, I really love the way that they handled this. And I'm going to take a bit of that and I'm going to add that into the mix of who I am. So therefore, there's always leadership impact, and it ripple effects. And then there are the leaders who were like, oh, that was not good. That had a really negative impact. I'm going to be really conscious not to do that. So in some ways, it sounds like you have really created your own tapestry of who you are as a leader from mixing in your different. So in a sense, I'm going to say that maybe perhaps it was an element of thinking, I don't know, genius thinking or thinking, certainly, to put that all together. Not many.
Some thinking, certainly some thinking. As I said, I would question the genius part. And I think the other reflection I would just give to those that are in leadership positions with teams is that, you're not going to get it right every time. It is about, over the course of time, are you more intentional than not? And do you feel you're more often than not taking the right decision, rather than being hypercritical and, deeply thinking about every single interaction and decision you take? Because it's, as I said, it's about the long-term trajectory of those decisions, rather than do you get everything right? In the nicest sense, if I get 51% of my people decisions right, that's great. On balance, I'm moving in the right direction. It's not about, 100%.
And so what is the impact for your team in terms of how you motivate them? And so actually, if we turn this around, you're now the leader, that your members of your team will take elements of you and take that with them on their journeys and so on and so forth. So what do you think I suppose your secret sauce, in a sense, to motivating them, especially given the times that we've just been through, and particularly, especially within finance as well, this is a particularly, it's been a place of ambiguity in the world, fast changes that impact a lot of decision-making skills. How do you keep and you've had a growing team, a fast-growing team. So How do you motivate them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there is probably 2 things I would say. I think it's about empathy and it's about really listening. And I think it's about adapting your style to what you're hearing in that individual. And so if I just expand, what works, what the triggers are to motivate person A could be very different to what the triggers are that motivate person B. And so whilst, I'd love to have like a blanket approach to everyone because we're very efficient, ultimately it's about really understanding, coming back to values, what does this person value? What has been the experience that shaped that person? And depending on the relationship you have with them, you go as far back as you possibly can, that, inform their emotional triggers, but on the negative side, but also inform their positive triggers. And so I think it's about understanding that, and you usually understand that by really intently listening, and so that you can adapt the way you engage with them to take account of that individual as an individual, rather than, as I said, the blanket approach. In my experience, and I probably fall into the same trap, we aren't great at really listening. We are listening with a view to responding rather than listening with a blank mind and really intentionally hearing the words, processing them. And so I think that's a big one, the empathy and the listening part. And I think it's, once you have built that knowledge up, I think it's about playing the toolbox of things you might have at your disposal, right? So it might be anything from, we have had a really tough week, let's blow off some steam, let's have some drinks, let's do something really trivial, to we've had, we need to solve this, let's all get in a room. I don't mind what we're all working on. We stop, we get in a room, we solve this problem until we've resolved it. So it's about being very flexible to the individual and the situation. I don't think there's a blanket approach, as I said. And again, it's about providing context and painting a bigger picture that conveys that we're making progress and that we are in this together, that things are improving, this is a great place, etc. Because sometimes people get they get a bit stuck in their own world and all they see is challenges, difficulties, X, Y, and Z. And it's I think our role as a leader is to lift them up and be like, hey, look where you were 6 months ago, look where we will be in 6 months as a collective, as an individual, X, Y, and Z. That's a pretty good place to be. So so it's a combination of those three things that I would say I'd use to motivate.
I mean, I think we can all relate to that problem where, especially for those potentially whose jobs are transactional as well, is when you get stuck in that and it feels like you're not going anywhere. And it's actually, as an example, a weird example, but certainly an analogy. I over the last, since lockdown, I took up open water swimming. And I was somewhere recently, and it was the current was really strong, and there's a basically a 400-meter course that you do a couple of times, and I remember there was this one side of the triangle in the course, and I was really, and it's the last one, so you're already getting tired and you haven't got as much energy as when you started, and it's really hitting you and you're going against the current, and it was holding, and I just kept going, oh my God, I'm not getting anywhere. And I was really suddenly aware of this thought of, I am not going anywhere. I'm really trying hard and I'm not going anywhere. And I immediately felt completely demotivated, which is difficult when you're in water because it's pretty essentially you keep going. And then I suddenly, it was a bird that caught my eye and it landed on the shoreline, and I looked over at the shore, and it was only then that I saw that I was moving. And it was then I saw the distance I was traveling, but where I was in this vast expanse of water and the feeling I was getting, I couldn't see any difference from where I had set off from the last buoy, like the marker in the water. But when I looked at the shoreline, I could see that I was traveling forwards. And in a sense, that's what you do for your people then, is that you give them that overview of, look, right now where you are, you're struggling in the water, and you might be feeling tired, and you might be feeling like you're up against it, and it's hard, you haven't got as much energy as when you started. So, but look over here, you are making traction, you are making movement in the great scheme of where you're traveling.
Yeah, and I think it's about that, as you said. I love the analogy. I think it's about giving context. I think it's also about trying to coach and get them to see maybe different ways to think about the situation. I do also think there is a need for a leader to intervene on wherever on the spectrum, whatever that might mean on the spectrum of intervention. I think it's about all three of those, giving context, helping them see possible ways they can help themselves, but also not shying away from, if a certain person is feeling particularly down or there's a certain task that is just not manageable for them, how do you, get your hands dirty and solve the situation either yourself or you move some things around in the team or whatever it is. Yeah, I think that is also something I think a leader has to be comfortable doing in a nicer sense.
Coaching to see ways through, giving context, and then also potentially intervening if necessary. So those are the three things that we need to, a leader needs to do. It's interesting you say that, because I was going to say, like, it always leads, I feel, to a very, very simple, very basic question. But sometimes when I think we overthink problems sometimes when we get to that point, because we're lacking that sustainable performance, which is we're tired, we haven't got, we haven't maybe been eating properly, we haven't maybe been doing things, we're overthinking, we're too stuck in that close view rather than looking at the big picture of it. And it all boils down to just that one question of, what do you need at this right moment to move forward, to get out of this? What do you need?
Indeed. I mean, so in the analogy of swimming, it's giving context, which is, hey, have a look to the left, look at the shoreline, you are moving. I think then it's about, well, are there, the coaching is, well, are there ways that you could improve your stroke? Are you turning your head too much or whatever it is? And obviously asking that in the right way that they come up with it. And intervention is, here's a bunch of flippers, that'll help you move a bit faster. So
calling for the lifeguard. Okay, I'm done. I need some help. Can I go have a rest on shore and a cup of tea and I'll try again later?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you that sometimes, it is great to have conceptual, theoretical, philosophical, ephemeral conversations. Ultimately, sometimes it is just as simple as, well, what do you need? How can I help? Or what do you need? Or what would change the situation for you in very simple English?
It's hard though to do that sometimes, and that for you as a leader requires self-awareness, which seems something that you've got. You work hard on that self-awareness for you, and it's something, as you said, that's been sown in you, something you challenge, something you think about. Would you say that's something do you work towards building, like, constantly? Are there things that take you off track with self-awareness?
I am sure that I probably would say that I'm 51% of the time self-aware and 49% of the time not, if I'm being harsh. But yeah, I think I am reasonably self-aware. I've benefited from, as I said, a professional environment where that always played into performance conversations. How do you conduct yourself? What are your blind spots, etc. Yeah, so I think I've benefited from that, and I do try and think about it. So it's one of the things that I guess for whatever reason it's in my mind.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I think this has been a brilliant chat, and we've really gone through some things in terms of the role of a leader and how you intervene. Really, for me, this conversation has been centered around values and actually how you make decisions and those decision-making skills, and taking the time to really think about the way you make decisions and what's informing those decisions. It sounds like, a really very lucky team, really, where you are, in terms that you've got someone who's thinking about all of those and who nurtures that in the team. So I suppose the last question really is, well, actually, I have two questions. I've been asking leaders about, most leaders are very, they love reading, they love their books, and have a leadership book that, for particular in them, that they really enjoyed, or something that really struck a chord with them and gave them a really valuable lesson. Do you have anything off the top of your head recently that's given you a really great impact?
Yeah, it's quite an old book. I think the title is What Got You Here Will Not Get You There. And it talks a little bit less about the values perspective actually, but I think when I see people in my team and they want to progress their career, and I think it's true even for my level, is, it's talking about the behaviors that got you to where you are today will possibly be exactly the behaviors that will stop you from progressing to the next level. And for me, that's been I always recommend it to people. When I read it, I thought it was very helpful. So it's a bit less, it's really not at all aligned to the conversation around values, but I think that's quite a good book to read. What got you here will not get you there.
I don't know. That sounds like, I love that concept, because it's exactly, again, someone this week actually was just talking about this, is like that worked for me to get me where I was now, but now I'm having to really reevaluate, because this is not going to get me to where I need to be today. And in fact, I'm just remembering the conversation, because what was is that they were very determined, very like go, very results driven. And now, as they're in a senior leader, kind of a C-suite role, they were going, that's not going to help me now. I need to be more empathetic. I need to be a better listener. I'm having to really work on those skills myself. So I think that's a really valuable lesson. But can we still do that with the values that you have? Can you change that? That's an interesting question to ask, really. Or psychologically, sometimes our values do change based on life events, stresses, realizations we've had. They can adapt and mold, but inherently they're what sit at the heart of our decisions. And I certainly know, whenever I work on values with someone, that's where confidence comes from, and that's where excellent decision making comes from, because you're sat there going, yes, that's exactly where that hits the boxes for what I need to do to inform my decisions, and now I feel comfortable with that.
Yeah, indeed.
Perfect. That's a really great recommendation. Thank you so much, and thank you for the chat today.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. Take care.